Story 1. So earlier this year, my boss took 3 months off to have some surgery and recover. I have been working for 28 years in my field, and I'm pretty capable of my job. My boss is a highly strung woman who believes only she knows how to do anything. Before my boss took her extended leave, I asked about filling in her role while she was on leave, and she told me, "You are not capable of doing my job. No one here is." I asked again in an email and was told the same thing. I sent the email to all my work colleagues. When they advertised to fill in my boss's role, no one applied. When management asked everyone why no one applied, they all said they were not capable. There are over 40 staff who did not apply. Someone from another site did apply. He had just completed his new graduate year. They appointed Bob, who was 24. Bob emailed me after a week directing me to do all his work. There was multiple links and documents, stock order, meeting agendas, etc. I replied I was happy to do this when I get a free moment. I did nothing. It was clear within a week that Bob had no idea how to be boss, and things were going wrong very quickly. I was called to a HR meeting and asked why I wasn't doing Bob's work he instructed me to do. I informed him that I already have a full-time job doing my work. How can I do Bob's as well? Secondly, I showed the email that said no one is capable of doing my boss's job. I was left alone after this. Bob basically did nothing for 3 months. My boss returned by blowing up how much work she has to do. She tried to blame the workers on the ground for not being helpful enough. I sent her back her email where she stated that I nor any staff was capable of doing her work. We didn't see her leave her office for months. Story 2. I was working as a scaffolder in 2020 for a construction company in Australia. I'm no longer employed by this company. This is my perspective. One day we were tasked to build up a scaffolding system for a private school. The private school was going to be renovated. On a Friday afternoon, I was walking under a fully built scaffold system hanging from the roof. Other people were working there before my team started extending the scaffold system along the roof. I had 2 tons of metric collapsing on me. I was struck to the ground. The injuries were painful enough I couldn't drive home. The first person to come rescue me and lift the scaffold system off me was Mark. Mark is the owner of the scaffold company. He was also the supervisor of my team that day. I was on the ground having tears in my eyes because of the pain. "You want an ice pack, mate?" Internally, I was like, "You want an ice pack?" What kind of a manager witnesses a scaffolding structure big enough and weighs more than 2 tons fall down on an employee then says, "Want an ice pack?" What hurt me the most is that Mark did not stop work, or do an incident report, or report the accident to the site supervisor of the school project. That hurt like a bullet. I just sat in the lunchroom in pain. He didn't even call an ambulance for me. After the shift ended, it was around 5:30 p.m. I saw Mark out the window speaking to the site supervisor. I went outside to meet them. I listened to their conversation and Mark didn't even mention the incident that took place. So I decided to speak up myself. "Hey, I had an incident a few hours ago." The site supervisor then said, "Do you know what to do if an incident happens?" "What?" Nothing, in shock. I just walk off, grab my tools and head off to my car. I was waiting there for a family member to pick me up. Along the walk, Mark decided to catch up to me. "Listen, mate, you can't say that type of stuff in front of the site supervisor. You have to keep it diplomatic." "Okay, no worries." I was still shocked at the audacity and got really mad, but I was still in a lot of pain and I couldn't have a confrontation with my manager at the end of Friday's shift, so I just tried to end it here for now. I then went to my car and waited for my ride. We then went to the hospital and applied for worker compensation. I told my manager I'm unable to work because of my injuries as I had fractured my right shoulder, right foot, and had bruises on the right leg. His reply was, "I want to see you in the office 3 days from now, no problem. Have you completed the incident report?" "No." "What for?" "You're not dead." That was it for me. I was done trying to be nice. He wouldn't do the incident report? Fine, I'll do it myself. I reported this incident to WorkSafe Australia. If you don't know WorkSafe Australia, they are the government body that protects the little people, not the corporate. They are basically the FBI for little workers in Australia. They can shut down any business with a snap of a finger. On the day I went into the office, I was yelled at for not coming into work. Well, at least until I showed my injuries and X-rays to the manager. He was also shocked when I gave him a resignation letter effective immediately. He threw it across the room. Legal documents thrown across the room. I should note that there are cameras at the school where they capture the incident, and cameras inside the boss office streaming live to people above him. So the report to WorkSafe went, "There are cameras everywhere at the private school buildings. There is my proof of evidence. It captures the moment when the scaffold system collapsed on me." 1 week later after the incident, Mark, who owns the business franchise, refused to pay for my medical bill, but he ended up doing it anyway because of WorkSafe Australia. Conclusion 1. The private school construction site was shut down for 3 months. Investigation commences. 2. The site supervisor and manager at the school has been sacked. The builder company lost the contract, costing them $600K. 3. Mark lost the contract with the school project, $2.40 million. He was assigned to another school if the private school was finished renovating, so he lost that as well. 4. Mark lost mining construction contracts with BHP Billiton and Rio Tinto. As you know, these are giant mining companies in Australia. And more mining companies in Western Australia outcasted Mark's franchise business, $3 million. I got injured, but I didn't even have to take Mark to legal court. WorkSafe Australia did everything for me. One person got injured, and it cost those companies millions of dollars. They asked for it, though. I'm still healing from the fractures. Mark's franchise went out of business 1 month ago, called for bankruptcy. His business was a multi-million-dollar franchise in Australia. Report all incidents before the worker reports it himself. I'm thankfully starting to walk again now. Story 3. So a while ago, I found myself in a situation that still makes me shake my head every time I think about it. It was my girlfriend's birthday, and she'd chosen this trendy fondue place for her celebration. You know, the type, one of those spots that's super popular, where you can't just walk in and get a table without waiting. So, there we were, my girlfriend, her friends, and I, all excited for a night of good food and good vibes. We arrived at the restaurant, and of course, there was already a crowd. I'm talking about 15-20 people milling around outside, all waiting for their turn to dive into some melty, cheesy goodness. We put our names on the list, knowing it might take a while, but we were cool with it. It was her birthday, after all, and we were in no rush. We hung out, chatting and laughing, trying to pass the time. While we were waiting, there were a couple of outdoor tables where people were finishing up their meals. Eventually, one of those tables cleared out, and the group that had been sitting there got up and left. The table was still covered with used plates and silverware, but it was now empty. Enter the guy who I'll call Smart Guy and his girlfriend. This dude strolls up to the restaurant, takes one look at the crowd of people waiting outside, and then spots the empty table with the dirty dishes. Without missing a beat, he walks right up to it and plops himself down like he's just cracked the code to the universe. You could see it in his eyes. He genuinely thought he'd outsmarted everyone else there. The rest of us were standing around, waiting our turn like fools, while he'd just bypassed the whole process. The smugness radiating off this guy was palpable. He had this look on his face like he was the main character in some movie where the underdog figures out how to beat the system. But here's the thing. Everyone else outside noticed him immediately. We were all standing there, seeing this play out in real time, and you could feel the collective wave of irritation and disbelief wash over the crowd. I caught the eye of another guy waiting nearby, and we exchanged a look that said, "Is this dude for real?" Smart Guy's girlfriend, on the other hand, did not share his enthusiasm. She seemed like a nice enough person, but the poor girl was clearly mortified. You could tell she knew this wasn't how things worked, and she tried to reason with him. I couldn't hear exactly what she was saying, but it was obvious she was trying to get him to understand that just because a table was empty didn't mean it was fair game. She kept gesturing toward the waiting list inside the restaurant, probably pointing out that they needed to add their names to it like everyone else. But Smart Guy wasn't having any of it. He doubled down on his brilliant move, mansplaining to his girlfriend that they didn't need to put their names down because, in his mind, they'd already won. He even pointed to the table as if it were some kind of prize he'd claimed. The way he saw it, they were now ahead of the game, and he wasn't about to give up his hard-earned seat to someone else. By now, people were openly glaring at him, and a few were even muttering under their breath. I heard one woman nearby say something like, "I can't believe this guy," and another person just rolled their eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck. His girlfriend kept trying to get him to understand that they couldn't just sit down, but he had completely tuned her out. Instead, he whipped out his phone and started scrolling, acting like he couldn't care less about what anyone thought. He was in his own little world, probably congratulating himself on being the only person smart enough to see the loophole. Then, just when I thought things couldn't get any more awkward, a waitress came out of the restaurant to clear the table. She spotted Smart Guy sitting there with his girlfriend and immediately knew what was up. The look on her face was priceless, this mix of disbelief and mild annoyance. She walked over to him, clearly not in the mood to deal with any nonsense, and said something like, yeah, you can't sit here. There's a huge waiting list. Do you seriously not see all these people around you?" At this point, the crowd couldn't hold it in any longer. A few people started laughing, and I heard someone say, "What did he think was going to happen?" Another person made a sarcastic comment, something along the lines of, "Oh, yeah, just help yourself, man." The laughter and comments seemed to break through Smart Guy's delusion because his smug expression finally started to falter. He looked around, suddenly aware of all the eyes on him and his girlfriend's burning embarrassment beside him. You could see it on his face, the slow, painful realization that his brilliant idea was not so brilliant after all. Sheepishly, he got up from the table, avoiding eye contact with everyone around him. His girlfriend was already on her feet, probably wishing she could disappear on the spot. She didn't even wait for him to get fully up before she started walking away, clearly done with the entire situation. I half expected them to head back inside and put their names on the list like they should have in the first place, but nope. She was too embarrassed to stick around, and honestly, I couldn't blame her. As soon as they were a safe distance away, the crowd started buzzing again, everyone shaking their heads and sharing looks of disbelief. The whole thing left me thinking about how some people just can't admit when they're wrong. It's like they'd rather dig themselves deeper into a hole than acknowledge they made a mistake. I get it, nobody likes feeling stupid, but doubling down on something that's obviously not going to work, that just makes you look even worse. In Smart Guy's case, his refusal to back down not only made him look foolish, but it also embarrassed his girlfriend to the point where she couldn't even enjoy the evening. In the end, we finally got our table, and the fondue was just as amazing as we'd hoped. But honestly, that whole experience with Smart Guy and his epic fail is what I remember most from that night. It was a perfect example of how sometimes trying to be the smartest person in the room can make you look like the biggest fool instead. Story 4. After being homeless for a while, I was desperate for any job I could get. So when I heard about this opportunity up north, I jumped at it. The work isn't bad. I rent out boats and cottages and mind the store that sells everything from beer to fishing supplies. It's quiet most days, which suits me fine. I'm not much for drinking or partying anyway. Everything was going smoothly until this afternoon when some entitled kid waltzed in like he owned the place. He looked maybe 17 or 18, definitely under the legal drinking age of 19 here in Canada. But that didn't stop him from grabbing a 24-pack of beer and bringing it to the counter. "Me, can I see some ID, please?" "Kid, what? I don't need ID. I'm 20. "Me, sorry, but I can't sell alcohol without seeing valid identification. No ID, no sale." The kid rolled his eyes at me like I was some kind of idiot. "Kid, come on, man. Don't be difficult. I told you I'm old enough." "Me, it doesn't matter what you tell me. I need to see proof of age. It's the law." "Kid, look, I'm in a hurry. My car's right outside and I've got places to be. Just sell me the beer. Something about the way he said that made me pause. If he was driving. Me, wait, so you're telling me you're driving without a license? The kid's face went red and he started stammering. Caught in his own lie, he turned tail and stormed out of the store, leaving the beer behind. I figured that was the end of it. Boy, was I wrong. About half an hour later, the bell above the door chimed. In walked a woman who looked to be in her 40s, followed by the same kid from earlier. He hung back by the door while she marched up to the counter, another 24-pack in hand. Woman, are you the one who refused to sell my baby his beer earlier? I glanced at the baby in question, who was very much not a baby and very much still without ID. Me. Yes, that was me. As I explained to him, we can't sell alcohol without proper identification. Woman, whatever. She waved her hand dismissively and tried to slide the beer towards me. Me, I'm sorry, but does your son have his ID now? Woman, no, he doesn't. I'm buying the beer. Me, I'm afraid I still can't sell it to you. Woman, excuse me. I'm in my 40s. I have my license right here. She fumbled in her purse and slapped her driver's license on the counter. I didn't even bother looking at it. Me, ma'am, I understand you're of legal age, but I know this beer is for your son, who hasn't shown me any ID. I can't legally sell alcohol to you knowing you're going to give it to a potential minor. That's when she lost it. Her face turned an alarming shade of red, and she started screaming at the top of her lungs. Woman, how dare you? You absolute moron. Who do you think you are? Me, I'm just doing my job. Ma'am, I could lose my license if I... Woman, I don't care about your stupid job. My son is old enough to drink, and I'm old enough to buy it for him. Me, I'm sorry, but that's not how the law works. Without proper ID. She cut me off by grabbing one of the beer cans from the pack and hurling it straight at my face. I ducked just in time, and it exploded against the wall behind me, showering everything in foam. Woman, go to hell. She punctuated this charming sentiment by flipping me off with both hands. Then she grabbed her son by the arm and dragged him out of the store, leaving behind a mess of spilled beer and my shattered nerves. As soon as they were gone, I called the police. My hands were shaking as I dialed, still in shock from what had just happened. I gave them a description of the woman and her car, but by the time they arrived, she was long gone. The rest of my shift was a blur. Story 5. Was sitting in a cafe I frequent reading a book this morning, and not one, not two, but 3 separate families came in with young children. Keep in mind, this is a cafe on a busy street with not much space between tables. The one mother was immediately loud and entitled the cafe is usually full of people quietly chatting, working or reading, and tried to compensate by fake smiling and pretending to care about those around her. Oh, do you mind if I take this chair? I hope you don't mind children sitting next to you, etc. She then proceeded to chat with the guy she was with, deadbeat dad, while her children wandered around the cafe looking for attention. The poor older child had obviously been tasked with looking after the baby and was not having it good for her. The baby at one point almost wandered out the door onto the busy street, and the mother slowly got up from her chair to lead him back to the table, and then promptly ignored him again, and he wandered off to my table where he was clearly looking for attention, which I was tempted to give him. Cute little guy. The other 2 families left their children to literally run around the cafe, and of course at one point one of the children tripped and fell, and then was screaming, while another child decided to dismantle the display of coffee grinders. And what are the parents doing during all this? Smiling, not a single speck of embarrassment or a thought for the other patrons in the cafe. At one point one of the kids tried to pull a laptop being used by another patron off a table. Now I love children and I work with them on a daily basis, so this is not about the kids, but I am exhausted by how many parents have no boundaries, self-awareness, or respect for those around them. The children suffer as well with a lack of boundaries and education on the difference between a quiet place and a playground, not to mention the obvious lack of engagement from their parents. It is possible to get a child of any age to sit and play quietly with proper engagement and boundaries. When I got up myself to kindly tell one of the young children that the product display was not a toy to play with, the mother seemed annoyed, and not at all concerned that the child could have hurt himself because what he was trying to pull down was made of glass and the floor is concrete. She then starts passive-aggressively talking to the guy she's with, who, if he was the dad, was the worst, about how, "Oh, I guess people aren't used to children, but it's so cold out. I guess we need a ballroom in here or something, blah, blah, blah." What an ass. She is saying this while blocking the aisle between the tables, so I had to walk all the way around the cafe to put my dirty cup in the dish bin. Compare this with a mother I spoke with 2 weeks ago whose son had gotten away from her and pulled my croissant off my table while I got up to get my coffee. She profusely apologized and bought me another croissant, and I hadn't even seen what happened. I had no problem with that. Accidents happen, and she took responsibility. The smiling passive aggression is the worst. No wonder so many children have behavioral problems if their parents smile while displaying aggression. It's just gaslighting. Story 6. A long time ago, I worked for a fast food place that has a very noticeable golden, bright yellow, usually symbol. The people involved. Me, a 17-19-year-old male living in a medium-sized town in the UK. I am now old, relatively. Damn, how does that happen? Also a giant toker at the time, had dreadlocks and smoked almost every day. Bitch queen, a hostile, but shockingly beautiful, and thoroughly nasty human woman, approx 1923-ish during all this nonsense. The bigman, a second assistant manager who I got on really well with from day one. He took no shit from bullshitters, had zero tolerance for bitch queen. His usual greeting was something like, "Hey bitch queen, who are you going to pick on today?" And if he saw her bullying someone, he would just walk in between her and the victim and bend down to stare in her face. She would walk off and pretend nothing had happened. More than once he stated if BQ were a man, she would have been beaten senseless by him by now. He hated violence, but she was really awful. Also, he was a bit of a unit, as in 250 pounds of muscle and a gym obsession long before it was cool. Also a fairly big smoker. We used to get high after work a lot with some of the other employees. Awesome manager. My store's first assistant manager, who was a wonderful woman who helped me as a human, a lot in a huge number of ways. Protecting me from bitch queen was only part of it. Senior area manager, who I will call Sam, since all the actual Sams I have all been good dudes too. Also a great protector from the BS of BQ. Monster bitch, the new store manager and the proximate cause of her own and BQ's downfall. Also a troll-faced harridan who oozed hate and bitterness. So time to tell the tale of how it panned out. I had been there a year or so before bitch queen was promoted to manager. Until then she was obnoxious but powerless. But somehow, after marrying the store manager, she got a promotion, jumping the next 2 steps up at that to second assistant manager. Surprising, eh? I had been warned by the bigman when I was first hired to never be alone with her, as she had a number of young men fired for groping her by her store manager BF fiancé husband, even when the video showed that there was no close contact, let alone groping in some of those cases. I was super careful in this regard. Bitch queen started playing games with the Rhoda against me and a few others she hated. I think she hated me because I got along with most people, and she always hated sociable and non-bitchy people. Her favorites got the best shifts, and the people she hated had our hours cut and shifted about without warning. She would pencil in changes a few minutes before a shift started. I caught her doing it, but her store manager husband didn't want to deal with it, and then send home the one who turned up for their now given away shift with a warning. She would then call up and scream at the one who was off, but now suddenly on shift, for not arriving when they had no idea the shift was changed. It's sort of genius, really, getting 2 workers bitch queen hated in one blow. She did try this crap on me, but I just called awesome manager, and she checked the computer records and sorted it out. She also let bitch queen know she was going to be checking the Rhoda daily and approving all changes, so bitch queen had to find a new tactic. I was a pretty hard worker, it made the time pass quicker for me, and was friends with the awesome manager and the big man, who protected me from bitch queen's bullshit almost all of the time, and would fix things when shit happened while awesome manager was off work. I also cultivated a good relationship with our Sam, and he ended up setting up a special store rescue team to sort out failing franchise, usually stores in the area, placing me in charge of it as the top trainer of the group. Bitch Queen was maybe 7 months into being a manager at this point. This made me more or less untouchable as long as I kept my nose clean, and so Bitch Queen went mental. She started on my friends, bullying and abusing them in work, and trying to get them all written up. They told me and I told awesome manager. She slapped Bitch Queen down again, metaphorically of course. The big man made some complaints about her treatment of the other staff, and she calmed down a little, until her husband got promoted to a different store some distance away. Later Sam admitted this was an attempt to calm the drama at our store. But how wrong it all went. Our new store manager was a monster bitch, but good at hiding it to begin with. After a few weeks, awesome manager noticed that only young women were getting accepted after interviews, and pointed this out to me and the big man, and asked us to keep our eyes and ears out for anything dodgy going on. It wasn't long until it became clear what was happening. I had made pretty good friend with one of the new hires, I admit it. I was interested, and she was hot. I will call her Shine Sweet. She was a lovely but very sheltered young lady from a nearby village, living in a house share in the town we worked in. She went out with the girls, a group centered on Monster Bitch, Bitch Queen, and a couple of Monster Bitch's friends on a Friday, and the next day in work was really distracted. We finished at the same time, so I offered Shine Sweet a lift, that is, I gave her a ride home in my car for our American friends, and she said yes since we lived pretty close together. In the car I asked if she had a fun night, just asking to fill the time. I wasn't digging at this point, and she replied in a very non-committal way. I remembered her saying she had a great time to Bitch Queen earlier during our shift, so I asked her if she was okay. She burst into tears and told me that she had been in the back of a taxi with Monster Bitch, and one of the friends, Bitch Queen, was up front and MB, and the friend had been groping Shine Sweet really hard. She showed me some bruises on her sides and thighs later. She said she had more on her boobs, and telling her she had to go back to their house and experience real sex. I was livid, but I tried to be outwardly calm. I told her that they should be punished, and I would support her. And I knew that Sam, awesome manager, and the big man would all have her back. I recommended we go to the police, but she was afraid she would lose her job. I knew she wouldn't, but couldn't convince her quickly, and I didn't want to traumatize her further, so I just said whatever she chose I would support, and to call me if she is ever in a similar situation, and I will come get her. She hugged me for ages crying, and we went and had a cup of tea in her house. Her flatmate knew something was up, and I encouraged Shine Sweet to tell her too. She did, and I left after making them more tea. I had to do something, but I couldn't directly involve Shine Sweet, and although I knew Sam, Awesome Manger, and the big man would believe me, I had no direct evidence of an assault. So what to do? Well, the first thing was to check where I stood legally, and it turns out the UK is a one-party consent recording jurisdiction. As long as I am in place with no reasonable expectation of privacy, I don't have to inform anyone I am recording audio or video, at least according to the lawyer I asked, who is a friend of my stepfather. Work counted as no expectation of privacy, so I was good to record everything. Of course, back then the smallest video cameras were the size of a small shoebox and really expensive, and I was a burger chucker, so cash was tight. Smoking a lot of weed didn't help there either. But you could get some reasonably cheap audio recording stuff that with an okay microphone could be hidden in my shirt. So I started a log of Bitch Queen and Monster Bitch's antics in the store. It was nearly 8 months of recordings in total before the fan was struck by feces. While they didn't direct much at me anymore, I was able to capture multi-minute rants from both of those awful harpies on almost every shift for about 6 months. In one recording I got Bitch Queen ranting at a coworker for about 20 mins, and then me for another 30 mins or so after I redirected her towards me. They would call workers almost always men, but any woman who had turned them down got some shit thrown their way too, stupid, useless and worthless, etc., with lots of fun adult words mixed in. They also got into the habit of threatening everyone they dislike with firing. I also got a lot of audio from young women about how creepy and sexually inappropriate Monster Bitch Queen, and their little gang of lesbian managers, most of them were or had dated men. So bi, I guess. But horrible humans regardless of their orientations were to the women who worked for us. I got several direct statements about female co-workers being abused and told to keep quiet by the abuse gang members on various girls' nights out, and a few of them referred to bad things happening at Monster Bitch's house when they were too drunk to remember everything. Basically, we had a blackmail and rape gang operating in our midst. The final attack on me came when I was called into work by OSA manager and told I was being investigated for smoking weed on shift. While I did smoke a lot of weed at the time, I never went to work high food. You get fired for eating without permission, and the munchies don't mix. And anyway, that day in particular, the accusation was dated was one where I hadn't had any for a couple of days or been able to sort any out for a smoke after work either. So I was totally truthful when I was asked about it by OSA manager, and she said that because of the bullying she was escalating this to Sam, so she suspended me on full pay pending an investigation. The next day Sam called me and asked me to come for a formal interview as the first part of the information finding process. He also said the bigman was on shift and would be happy to be my witness. So I went down and sat in the crew room waiting for Sam with the bigman. Sam stuck his head around the door and said, "Deny everything to do with weed," and winked. He stepped out again and then opened the door with a serious face and asked myself and the bigman to come through to the back office. We went through a few questions, and I answered everything truthfully. Pretty sure Sam thought I was smoking that day, but gave no F's about weed, and the interview ended with Sam reinstating me, paying me for the previous day and the interview day, and giving me another store to fix for 2 weeks to get me away from Bitch Queen and the pack of harpies. When I was back from the failing store, but not working that Monday, I got a call from Shine Sweet. MB and BQ had told her she had to come to their girls-only house party that Friday. It was going to be a BBQ and probably a lot of raping drunk girls by hostile lesbians. The rape gang had been telling all the attractive girls to go to the party or think about finding a new job if you can't be a team player. MB, BQ, and another whore worked at our store. The other 3 worked at a nearby store. And that was the straw that broke the proverbial camel's back. I had those awful bitches. I had organized the audio files into groups by person and topic. I had over 10 hours of insults and abuse recorded, and I had nearly another 10 hours of staff telling me how they had been abused by BQ, MB, and their pack of rapists. I called Sam and told him I had to speak to him that day. He agreed, and we met at a competitor's store. I think they have a kingdom of burger chuckers. At lunchtime, where I sat him down in front of my awful, at the time super cutting-edge LOL laptop and had him listen to bits of the rape allegations first. He started shaking with rage after about 30 seconds, stopped it, and told me to go to the police. I then started on the abusing rants messages, and he listened to bits of a bunch of them and asked for copies of those files. I had already burned them to CD, so I handed them over and went to the police station. I asked for a woman police officer and had her listen to the abuse allegations. She took a CD copy of those and told me to be quiet while they investigated. I said fine, but that this Friday the rape gang would have a number of under 18s at an alcohol-fueled rape party. She asked for and got the address and details. I passed on the names of all the women who I knew for sure had been attacked in the past too. Since the police wanted to contact them to confirm things, the police here never give out witness information, so I was safe from retaliation. The next Thursday I was on a late shift, so I arrived around 15:15, and when I got there the store was shut, but the staff were inside. I got let in and told what had happened. Monster Bitch and Bitch Queen had been on day shifts, and were apparently non-stop talking about how great their girls-only party would be, how any girl who had a boyfriend would dump him after spending the night with them, and how any women who didn't attend were basically traitors to womankind. After about 6 hours of this, and at around 14 o'clock 6 police officers come into the store and arrest Monster Bitch and Bitch Queen on suspicion of sexual assault, blackmail, extortion, and assault. They were both removed in handcuffs and Sam was there just after the police to shut them out of the computers and officially suspend them. When I arrived, they were just getting set to reopen, so we got back to work. Later, I got more info on the case. My best friend's older brother was in the police force locally, and he kept us updated. MB's rape house was raided. The police found lots of videos of what was clearly assaults on drunk and non-consenting women. They got lots of text message evidence for planning sexual assaults and talking about how to control young female employees to get them to have sex with the rapists. They also had lots of threatening messages to victims to be quiet or face revenge, loss of job, etc. All their victims were under 20, with most being 16-18. But the deepest mess up for them came from this evidence, and I had no idea when I got this all in motion. Monster Bitch had picked up a young woman from a club a few months earlier. This young lady was up for lesbian sex with MB, BQ, and another friend, while a fourth on filmed it. But the young lady was 15 and just looked over 18 with makeup, etc. So the rape gang had produced child porn inadvertently. MB, BQ, and all the other managers who were involved were fired after the arrest charges. They were all charged with a number of things, but the courts back then were even more lenient to female sexual offenders than they are now, so none of them saw prison. But they were all banned from working with children, or in an environment where children will be present, and the ones who were married in a relationship were all divorced, broken up inside a year. Because of the UK laws at the time, they were also not named publicly. I know Bitch Queen never really recovered or grew past this. I see her now and again if I visit my mother, and she is still beautiful, but so clearly broken it's almost sad. Shine Sweet was my girlfriend for a year or so. A few years later, we parted on good terms as she was off to study overseas. Awesome Manager went on to be a store manager, and then a pro dominatrix, which wasn't a real surprise to me. She was a fun lady. The Bigman went on to run an IT department in a large company, still a top bloke, and I ended up in a field I love, being paid actual money to more or less mess about all day, and that is doing my job.